Thank you very much for the kind invitation, and very good morning to everybody in this rainy Hungary today. So 5 years on, and we are still in crisis, and Europe still in crisis, and we can say also Central and Europe still in crisis in a way. In the mid-70s, the British or UK group Supertramp released a CD with the title Crisis. What crisis? We are talking about crisis, but the main question is what kind of crisis do we have? So I think we have a crisis which has many political roots. I do agree, as always, with Maggie Thatcher when she said that the economic problem never starts with economics. They have really deep-seated roots in human nature and also in politics. And we would like to solve the economic problems. I think we have to solve also the political problems. So there's both sides. Every side of the crisis, economic part, has its counterpart in politics. So let's look at just some example to it. Let's look at the euro. So this is a running joke about the euro, and two economists are just discussing it. I understand that you are an economist. Yes, I am an economist. Do you understand the euro? Could you explain the euro? No, I am an economist. So because the euro, to some extent, is a political project, it's not just an economic issue, but also a political project. And there are many integration aspects missing. What means when we look at the optimal currency union theory, there are some fiscal union, for example, or banking union are missing. And that is what also Romani Prodi said at the very beginnings of the last decade. That I'm sure that the euro obliges us to develop many institutions. And at that time, he said that it's not possible to propose that. But someday, there will be a crisis, a new instrument will be created. Congratulations, we can say. The someday is here, we have the crisis, and Europe is step by step struggling with this whole idea how to implement instruments such as banking union, fiscal coordination. It has many parts of that. The second point, when we look at the debt crisis, many countries are hugely indebted, and that is the discussion. Is there any threshold in that case? What Kenneth Rogoff said is 90%. If you have the GDP, so the debt to GDP ratio higher than 90%, this is dangerous for the economy. Certainly we can discuss it, how far this threshold is exact or not. But one thing is certain, that high debt can influence the possibility of the economy and can reduce the growth prospect. But the question is why we have it. And certainly sometimes this whole debt issue is put into a moral issue. In Britain, you know, in the UK, they make from everything a reality show. So they have also on the Channel 4 in the reality show, how can you destroy a country such as Greece? And let's go to Greece, live there, how the Greeks are living, and that was the aim behind how to have such a development. But certainly it has some moral aspect. Why some countries are indebted or not? I am not very satisfied with this issue. Sometimes when you look at the whole discussion on debt situation in Europe, sometimes it has been put to a moral situation. The lazy Greeks, for example, that is why all the countries which spray and has some consequences. And we can see that what we have in some countries, in particular in the southern countries, which is normally the boom and bust cycles, and how the cheap credit fueled some booms. For example, in Ireland, the property boom. It has also some political consequences, because I think in Europe in the last decade developed in many countries, I wouldn't say the problem is the welfare state, it's rather the debt finance welfare states. And the welfare state was captured in many countries by different distributional coalitions which hindered the growth anyway. So the main problem in Portugal, for example, or also in Italy, that in the last decade they hadn't had any growth, 0 point something or 1%. And the question is certainly how can we get forward. So my impression is sometimes, and I would call it rather as a jukebox economics. So just look back at the last 5 years. Europe has tried nearly everything. The first 2 years was the time of the stimulus packages, like Keynes, in many countries. That means, okay, the state should step in, spend more, and should stimulate the economy. That was the time 2008 and 2009. And it is logical. After a while, it has some burden. That means more spending, increase the debt and the deficit, and after the financing of the debt will be difficult on the financial market, and stop this cycle. After that, we had a time, I would say, that between 2010 and 2011, it's rather a time of Dostoevsky, crime and punishment. So countries were forced to keep the budget deficit, cost what it cost, at the level below 3% of the GDP, and to cut expenditures. But if you cut deeply the expenditure, it has a consequence, certainly, that after a while it has a negative influence on economic growth. And if you have negative influence on the economic growth or recession, this means less revenues from the states, and this means you have to raise the taxes and so on. That is a downward spiral in a way. And now in the last 2 years, 1.5 years, we see the central banks are trying the quantitative easing to solve the problem. Let's see how we'll say. The main problem is, I think, and the politician likes very much this, that you put one button and you will see the results immediately. So this policies, and that is why I say rather a jukebox economies, that is a one-size-fits-all. They don't think about the different trade-offs if you have this direction, what consequences on many things. And only short-term measures in many times. But I think the main point is that because we think that one policy should be the stimulus packages or the austerity measures or should be the quantitative easing is enough. And we don't think about the most important part, how to make our country more competitive, because it distracts, unfortunately, from the reforms. So I think the most important way, how can we get out from the crisis? Certainly, we need fiscal stability. That is one thing. But at the same time, we have to implement the reform which make our countries more competitive. And if the countries are more competitive, that means decreasing debt to GDP ratio, and after that, easier financing. And so I think that is not a downward spiral, that is rather than an upward spiral. The question is certainly when reforms, it sounds good, lovely. There are, I think, 3 questions according reform. Who is setting the reform agenda? If you look at Europe in the last 3 years, there are many possibilities. One is possible reform is driven by the market forces, but it is rather short term. So if you have high CDS price or the interest rates for state bonds are high, the state should react to something. Yeah? And that is, I think, rather short-term measures and short-term stabilization. The second possibility, the international organization, you know this, all the European Union, IMF, ECB, which not just help the countries, bailout and so on in Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Portugal, Ireland and so, but they require also some policy changes. But they are sometimes, in many cases, institutional changes first, and second rather medium term. I think the best way, when the agenda is set by the country itself, by national reform policy. Sometimes there are some discussion, the national reform policy and the policy advised by the IMF, for example, in case of Hungary, yeah? Or also in many countries. But I think that is the best way, when the country itself has a reform policy, how the country would like to increase the competitiveness. The second question is not just who is setting the agenda, the reform, what is the speed of the reform? And when you look at this map, I think you can see there are 3 different regions in Europe. One is, I would say, the core, in that case, Germany, core Netherlands, also some Scandinavian countries to it, which carried out the reform in the mid of the last decade. Just think of the hard 3 and 4 reforms in Germany to make more flexible the labor market. And there are many discussions why Germany are such a strong and such a competitive. That is one of the reasons for it. So I think the core already carried out the reforms, not every, but most of them. In Southern Europe, the main problem is rather the low progress. The main problem is that also in Italy or in Spain or in Portugal, not to talk about, not to mention Greece or Cyprus and so on, the changing institutional changes or the labor market reform or the regional reform is very, very slow. In Italy, they are discussing that, okay, we have 109 provinces which are unnecessary. How can we abolish it, for example? And they are talking about for 3 years since Monti came to office. Or in Spain, there is a problem with the regional structure, and also a problem how to liberalize the labor market. By contrast, I think in Central and Eastern Europe, the Central and Eastern European countries are running with the reforms in a very fast way. Hungary is exceptional in that case, I think, because we introduced in every year a huge range of reforms and legislations. Sometimes it's so huge that also from outside you can really recognize what is changing, because it's always changing. In the last year, the Hungarian parliament passed more than 300 new pieces of legislation. Could you imagine what does it mean? But those coming from Germany, maybe they know the words, the Reformstau, and the congestion of reforms, when you have a huge need to carry out reforms in a relative quick time. And the third thing, when we are talking about reform, I think that every reform changes to some extent the relationship between the state and the market. There is not a strict border forever between state and market. There is always shifting involvement in that case from the state side and also the market side.